Hi everyone, I'm Kat Plimpton. I am on the leadership team of Green Evans, a student organization here at the University of Washington. Our mission is to connect graduate students interested in environmental issues within the Evans School and across campus to focus on environmental public policy and problem solving occurring locally and globally, and enhance students' understanding and participation in the environmental policy process.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lenferna. I'm with the RSO Confronting Climate Change. It's great to see such a wonderful crowd here. Confronting Climate Change is a student group on campus, and we're dedicated to the fight for climate justice. That involves educating the public, engaging in policy issues, and sort of organizing for grassroots climate change action. We also go under the name of Divest, so we're a bit more infamous for that. And I'm actually quite happy to announce that just last night, the ASU Dub voted overwhelmingly in favor of the university divesting, so that's great.
Our groups came together to organize this panel, Putting a Price on Carbon Pollution in Washington State, to involve the UW community and the greater public in an important discussion that we hope will continue beyond this room tonight. So first off, Casey Golden is Senior Policy Advisor at Climate Solutions and Board Chair of 350.org. He is a leader in the climate movement locally and nationally. He has served as a Special Assistant to the Mayor of Seattle for Clean Energy and Climate Protection Initiatives, and as an Assistant Director in Washington's Department of Community, Trade, and Economic Development. From 1989 to 1994, he was Executive Director of the Northwest Energy Coalition. Casey earned his bachelor's degree at the University of California, Berkeley, and was a Kennedy Fellow at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, where he received his master's in public policy.
Thank you all for being here, and Kat and Alex, thanks for your introduction and for your leadership on campus. I like the age mix, the demography mix in this room. It's good to see a lot of students. It's good to see a lot of older folks like me as well. And I have to say that as somebody who's been doing this for a long time, the leadership of the young leaders in the climate movement on this campus and around the country and in the organization that I chair, 350.org, is an incredible inspiration. I hope you'll all support that leadership. And your news today about divestment at UW is the best thing I've heard all day. That is great news. I hope folks here will really lean into that campaign, especially as Global Divestment Day approaches on February 13th. And I also want to thank my fellow panelists for being here, who are among the leaders in their own communities about how to advance this policy discussion. We'll hear some agreements and some disagreements tonight, but I think what you see is a sort of growing convergence of people who are really determined to get something big done and get it done soon. I think that's a super exciting development. What can I do to make some slides come up? Anybody? Is there a yes button or just an advance button? Yay, thank you. If it was just the green button. Thank you. I owe this title, Yoram, do I owe this title to you or to Alan? One of the intellectual leaders on environmental taxation, revenue neutral taxation, and the great work at the continuing work at the Sightline Institute. I choose it instead of the title of the whole panel, which is something about putting a price on carbon. There is a price on carbon. The people in the Philippines are paying the price on carbon right now. People around the world are paying the price on carbon. And the problem, I think, is more that that's not well reflected in the prices that we pay for energy. And I kind of like this formulation a little better. I want to start with this slide. How many people have seen this? This is probably the most widely used slide I've ever seen in climate presentations. People love this slide. And the reason I show it is, it's funny, but it's kind of an ideological Rorschach test. I've seen a lot of audiences respond to it. It's interesting how people respond to it in different ways. Because for progressives like me, we sort of look at it and we get a good chuckle at the climate deniers, and that's always fun. And then we get to talk about all the other co-benefits of reducing our dependence on fossil fuels, which we also like, because those things coincide with our vision of better communities. Conservatives look at this and they're not so comfortable with it. Because because we're poking fun at climate deniers, and many of them are, and B, because all those other things on the slide, all those things we call co-benefits, many of us like those, but they get a little suspicious about that. They go, well, those are nice words, but what do you really have in mind by livable communities? And this sounds an awful lot like potential social engineering, and this sounds like it sort of proves that this whole climate issue is a kind of a stalking horse for the broader liberal and progressive agenda. So it's just really interesting to see how, you look at the same thing through different ideological perspectives. And the whole climate issue, of course, has become kind of an ideological Rorschach test that way. But meanwhile, and I know we're not doing a science presentation here tonight, but while we're, building our ideological narratives and playing our political games, the physical situation is truly unraveling. And I say this not because there's going to be any dispute about it tonight, but because the magnitude of it, it's important to kind of keep that in mind as we calibrate and think about policy solutions. Because sometimes the discussion in policy circles is kind of calm and slow and patient, and the physical reality really isn't. So this is from the last comprehensive report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and it describes the choice before us. This is actually a choice between two worlds. These are different models, but the basic difference in the models is not a matter of climate science dispute, it's a matter of what kind of societies we build and how much fossil fuels we use to run them, whether we build a clean energy economy or whether we stay with a fossil fuel economy. On the left is a world that will still experience some meaningful climate change, some painful climate change, but a world that you could still imagine adapting to, a world that we would still recognize as planet Earth. On the right is a world that would be so violently and completely transformed by chaotic, disruptive climate change in this century that we have to give it a new name. So let's call that one Planet Toast. This is the choice in front of us right now, and we don't have a lot of time to make it. It is still possible to choose Earth, to choose a thriving planet and the planet we love and the only home we know. But there's not a lot of time, and it is getting quite urgent, and we need to think about our policy through that lens. I'm going to bum you out for a second. Don't curl up into a ball. We've got a lot of work to do. But even scientists are careful by nature. They choose their language carefully. They don't want their research funding cut off. But even they are starting to say things like incompatible with organized global community and beyond adaptation. That is the current path on the right. That is business as usual. That's what happens if we don't turn decisively and now toward a clean energy future. So let's do that. It is indeed a big and daunting challenge, but it is fundamentally not that complicated. First, we have to stop making it worse. Don't dig the hole. The first rule for getting out of holes, don't stop digging. And the second is we have to wage and win a clean energy revolution. I'm going to talk about the second very briefly. That's another whole presentation that I'd be happy to do for you. But just quickly, this is the title of a report. You would expect me to talk about the clean energy revolution, right? But this report is authored by those crazy Bolsheviks at the United States Department of Energy, who did a report on the pace of technology change in the clean energy economy. Solar, and each of these, I'm just going to run through them real quick. Each of these is, the blue bars are the cost of the technology going down, the green line is the deployment of the technology going up, just in the last 5 years. I mean, solar is completely taken off. It costs less than a quarter of what it cost in 2008. Wind over a longer period of time, but the same basic trend. LED lights, same story, and then batteries and electric vehicle technology, which turns out to be a really important sort of gateway technology to a whole bunch of transformation in the energy system. Electric vehicles are getting close. It's cost competitive. Many of us have them in this community and run them on clean electricity. So the clean energy revolution is on. That is the good news. So now let's get a little bit more systematic and then turn toward why carbon prices and limits are so important in terms of making this whole picture come together. Some of you may have seen this thing from Princeton called stabilization wedges, which is just kind of a nice visual paradigm for thinking about the whole challenge and what are the pieces of the solution. So they say, don't pay attention to the numbers. They're outdated and they don't matter. But the concept is the upward sloping line is quote unquote business as usual. The downward sloping line is some version of a stabilization trajectory of getting to a safe place. And then in the lower thing, you can divide them up into what are called stabilization wedges. And then what do you fill those wedges with? You fill them with solutions. You undoubtedly will not like all of these solutions, but here's 15 of them that if you took them to scale could fill one of the wedges in that stabilization triangle. All of them are, big lifts, but all of them are well within what we currently understand how to do technologically. So let's use that wedge paradigm, but then let's pause back at my first bullet and stop making it worse. This is from the International Energy Agency, a group of energy economists. And the important thing about this, is here again is a stabilization trajectory of business as usual. That goes up to toast. This one goes to earth. And the important thing about this is the blue area is we've already built all the infrastructure that's going to create all those emissions out to 2035. We bought that. If we keep on, this was done in 2011, and they said if we keep until 2015 building fossil fuel infrastructure at the current pace, then we'll have bought all that. If we keep on just another 2 years with business as usual fossil fuel infrastructure investment, we will have built all of the pipelines and power plants and heavy fossil fuel infrastructure that takes us to the red, it's green in this picture, but the line of the golden cross. And so the point of this is, we know all those 15 things we can do to make it better, but if we don't stop making it worse, we're not going to get there. I call this the Keystone Principle because it is sort of the larger stakes around the Keystone Pipeline fight. You have to stop making it worse if you're serious about making it better. Now you say, well, that's not very useful because I make it worse every time I get in the car and every time I go to the gas station, right? That's not what I mean by making it worse. I mean long-term infrastructure investments that drive the trajectory upward. If you go to the store tomorrow in your car, that's within our existing emission inventory. Over time, maybe you'll buy a more efficient car or choose another transportation mode, or we'll evolve over decades toward a cleaner future. But in the meantime, we have run out of time for making it worse. And that is a clear line in the sand, non-negotiable, and that's really what the Keystone battle is about. So now let's put the whole picture together and look at carbon pricing. So there's our business as usual. There's an economist joke that goes with the business as usual line, but I'll save the economics humor for, you can ask about it in Q&A if you want, but the point of the exercise is business as usual is kind of an economic abstraction. I mean, yes, it's what happens if we continue on as before, but it's physically impossible to do that. Really, the world starts falling apart. You can't just keep putting fuel on the fire as everything burns up. So that's not real, and we need to think about business as usual differently. After all that stuff up there above the yellow line is mistakes we haven't made yet. We don't have to make those mistakes. That makes this whole challenge, the challenge of getting from the toast trajectory to the earth trajectory, a lot easier if we just say business as usual doesn't mean voluntarily walking into things we know we can't do anymore. So here's our new morally improved business as usual. Everything above that is not really very negotiable. It's not really a gray area. That's why we're being so resolute about the Keystone Pipeline and about things like coal export. You just can't do that anymore. So there's the Keystone Principle. Everything above that is all that stuff that was on the first slide and all the things we do to build a clean energy future. You can think of those as technology wedges. You can think of them as policy wedges. But they're all the things we're doing, and there's a lot of pieces, and those we can be a little bit more forgiving with ourselves about. It's going to take time to unwind ourselves, from where we are to here, and to change our infrastructure and our whatever else goes along with that, some of the lifestyles. And if we stop shooting ourselves in the head, in the meantime, we actually do have time to work our way down that, because this is just inherently not an overnight kind of transition. So that's how I think about the whole challenge now. What's missing? Why aren't we doing this, and what do we need to do to put ourselves in position to do it? Well, first of all, we have a goal in state law. We call it a limit in state law that says, look something like a line that goes to earth, the stabilization trajectory. But it's not a firm, legally enforceable limit, as much as I would still like to explore ideas about how to enforce it. You need to make that a commitment. It's not a goal, it's not a trajectory, it's not a model run. It's us saying we will do this. We know what we have to do scientifically, and we're going to commit the force of law, our collective will in its clearest form, to get the job done. That is what our kids need to hear. That is what the energy markets need to hear. That is what other countries who are contemplating action need to hear, that we are firmly and legally committed to do the job. So that's what we call a cap, or a limit on carbon pollution. What's the other thing we're missing? This is my funky PowerPoint graphic for an economic wind blowing in the wrong direction. And this is what the economists call unpriced externalities. It is the price we are paying now for climate change that's not reflected in energy costs. In effect, it's a huge subsidy to the fossil fuel industry. It's the costs of all the things associated with climate change that real people are paying, sometimes with their lives, that are not reflected in fossil fuel transactions. That blows an economic wind in the wrong direction, up toward toast. All of our solutions, everything we do to be part of the solution, has to sail against this unfair economic headwind because we have failed to internalize those costs and the price we pay for fossil fuels. So we got to get the price right. We got to get the price to tell the truth. I'll be done. Thanks. And those are the two, I think, we could talk about lots of other policy and program and technology solutions, and there's a lot of them, and there's a lot of great ones, and I don't mean to exclude them. This is what we're here to talk about tonight, and I'm adding a limit to price because I think it's important to think about them together, and I think they're both essential. So that brings us to Governor Inslee's Carbon Pollution Accountability Act. If it has a bill number, I don't know what it is yet. But it's, the legislature is just getting started. The governor has committed himself to climate action and is introducing this bill. Very quickly, the major features of it are a cap, a real legal commitment to do the job, to take the limits that we put in law in 2008 and actually effectuate them with the source of law, the force of law. Well, that means that we're only going to have allow a finite amount of pollution, right? So who gets how much, and you have to have a permit for whatever pollution you get, and those permits won't be free. So that will internalize some of the price of that carbon into the cost of fossil fuels in the form of, think of them as fees for pollution allowances or that sort of thing. But it brings the price in, and allowances will be auctioned. Those auctions will create public revenues. The legislature, as you may have heard, is very interested in the subject of public revenues, having been found by the Supreme Court to be in contempt for failing to fund education and for a variety of other reasons. Revenues and size of government is always, a philosophical and political and ideological divide. I think these investments that are in the bill are worthwhile and important. I want to make clear, though, something that Todd and I will probably agree on, which is investments, public revenues are not the point of climate policy. Yep. The point is to get the prices right, to internalize those costs, and to drive the enormous amount of money that we spend on energy, drive those investments in the right direction instead of the wrong direction. This policy will produce revenues. The legislature is very interested in that. I personally believe the state has a lot of needs in this area, some of which relate very directly to solving the climate challenge. So I believe in that, but I also want to say, keep your eye on the ball. It's not why Governor Inslee is proposing the climate policy or why I'm proposing. Those revenues in the bill would fund a working families tax credit, and from our perspective, the one bottom line in terms of how we use the revenues and how we design the policy is it has to be equitable. A carbon tax by itself can be regressive. We can't have that. Climate change itself is a big enough injustice. We're not going to impose more of that with climate policy. They would also go toward filling the education hole, some clean transportation investments and some clean energy and R&D things are also in the bill. And also some protection for trade-exposed industries who need to compete in jurisdictions that may not similarly have a carbon price. So that's it in a nutshell. Happy to answer more questions about it. And I'll just leave you with the thought that when we talk about a carbon price, we and our opponents will say, well, you're trying to make people pay more to live their lives. And of course, that's exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. We don't want anyone to pay a carbon price. We're paying too high of a carbon price then by accepting unchecked climate change that leads us to toast. It's exactly that price that we're trying to avoid by giving ourselves better alternatives. And I think this policy direction will help unlock our potential to do just that. Thank you.
The next speaker on the list is Todd, Environmental Policy. Todd is the author of the book Eco-Fads, How the Rise of Trendy Environmentalism is Harming the Environment. He's also a designated Wall Street Journal expert panelist for energy and the environment, and he's authored numerous studies on environmental issues. He formerly served on the executive team at the Washington State Department of Natural Resources and was Director of Public Relations for the Seattle Supersonics and Director of Public Affairs from the Seattle Mariners. Todd also is an alum of UW, and he holds a master's degree in Russian and International Studies from UW's Jackson School of International Studies.
So my name is Todd Myers. I'm the Environmental Director at the Washington Policy Center. We're a public policy think tank that focuses on free market solutions. Because fundamentally, we believe that the creativity of everyone in this room is what is necessary to reduce environmental impact in terms of carbon, water quality. I also sit on the Puget Sound Salmon Recovery Council, forestry, resources. It is the aggregated creativity of the people in this room and the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis that are the most powerful and effective force for doing good for the environment. And so with that, let me ask you this. How many people think in this room climate change is a serious issue? Raise your hand. All right. If you think climate change is a serious issue, then what that means is you should have no tolerance for policies that fail. If I said, I agree with you that climate change is a serious issue, and that's why I'm putting together a drum circle to solve climate change, you would say, this guy is not serious because it doesn't solve the problem. That's the fundamental thing that you have to remember about addressing climate change is that the policies that we adopt in Washington State and too often across the country are focused more on making ourselves feel good, that we're doing something, rather than being effective. And there's some very notable examples. Corn-based ethanol is a great example of something we sunk huge amounts of money and time into and actually probably made the problem worse. We've done a lot of work on green buildings. You see, you've heard of LEED, which is a green building standard. We looked at an analysis of LEED and other green schools in Washington State, and we found that on average, green schools use more energy than their non-green counterparts in the same school district. So a green school, in many cases in Spokane, used 30% more energy per square foot than a non-green school. The state audited the schools and found the same thing we did. Have we changed the law? No, we have not. Because then politicians would have to admit that they were wrong. And that is more painful than doing the right thing to help the environment. Now, we can fight about whether that's really true or not, but if you think that climate change is a serious issue, you have to demand results. And when you don't get results, you say, we need to change and go a different direction. That's the fundamental problem I have with cap and trade, is that it puts power in the hands of politicians. And politicians consistently choose feeling good over effectiveness. The free market, on the other hand, demands results. And it reminds me, because all the time we hear that, if politics and government doesn't do something, it'll just get worse. And my response to that is that the man who says it can't be done should get out of the way of the woman who is doing it. Because the free market is doing it. How many people in here own or know somebody who owns a hybrid vehicle like a Prius? Right? Almost everybody. The hybrid didn't come out of government. California passed a law in 1990 requiring electric vehicles. A certain percentage of cars be electric. Toyota and Honda said, well, we can't do that. The technology's not there, but we will do a hybrid. And so they released the Prius and the Insight. And those cars sold like crazy. In fact, they sold so well that in 2003, California had to change their law to say, okay, we're going to count hybrids. They came out of the free market, not out of government. The reason that you're seeing electric vehicles today, like the Tesla, which is a super cool car, is because, it's not because government, it's because of these. The battery technology in laptops and cell phones made it possible, improved the battery capacity of electric vehicles. And in fact, some of the early electric vehicles were simply laptop batteries strung together so that they could run the car. The free market made it possible. That's what we need to harness. And there's a better way to do it than cap and trade. So let me just give you one example. You hear all the time that the cap means that we're going to achieve the goal, right? That we have this glide slope. But that's not the way it's worked out. So Nate Silver, who runs 538, is a stats guru, if you've ever heard of him. So he did an analysis of RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative in the Northeast, where the governor has claimed that, oh, it's working very well. And he compared the trend in RGGI states to non-RGGI states, right? The United States as a whole, which has no policy, states like Texas, And what he found is that actually the Reggie states did no better than the non-Reggie states. Cap and trade didn't work, and the reason is that they set the cap wrong, they gave free allowances. That was exactly the same thing you saw in Europe. Europe under the Kyoto Protocol missed the targets. The reason they missed the targets is because when push came to shove, politicians started handing out free allowances. They made exemptions for the trade-dependent industries that Casey talked about. And when push came to shove, they missed the targets badly. The more political the system, the more political games get played. That's the fundamental problem with cap and trade. Carbon tax is superior because it is simple and transparent. And so this is what you end up seeing in Washington State. It's even worse because you're going to see a chart like that. That's the chart of the carbon price in Europe. You see huge variability. In Washington State, we see this to a great extent. Just between 2 years, you saw a 52% change in the CO2 emissions from Washington State because we're so hydro-dependent. 2 minutes, thank you. So we have a high snowpack year and then a low snowpack year. If you have a flat cap, what's going to happen to the prices? They're going to fluctuate wildly, and you're going to get that. We've experienced this in Washington State. We experienced it in 2001 when we had the energy crisis. Our carbon emissions, energy prices went up a lot, and our carbon emissions went down dramatically. You know why? Because aluminum companies left Washington State. They didn't stop producing aluminum. They just went somewhere else. That didn't help the environment. Because climate change is a global issue, and if you simply squeeze the tube of toothpaste because of these sort of widely varying prices, companies will leave because they don't have the predictability. They can deal with a price as long as it's predictable. Cap and trade's not predictable. Carbon tax cut that we favor, I'm going to have Yoram talk more about this, is revenue neutral. Right? So we say, if you can reduce carbon, you will reduce your taxes. And we're going to give you some tax cuts elsewhere so it balances out. It won't balance out for everybody, but you have a strong incentive to reduce it, and it's worked elsewhere. And it has great bipartisan support. Peter Orszag, who was Barack Obama's first budget director, says he favors putting a simple price on carbon. Same as Art Laffer, who was Ronald Reagan's most famous economic advisor. It's very effective. It's simple, it's transparent, it doesn't have the political problems that cap and trade does. So here's my final message. Here's me looking at my bees. I'm a beekeeper. And so I'll just give you this last little story. Some of you have heard about colony collapse disorder, where the bees are dying and things like that. So the president announced last year that he was going to do something about colony collapse disorder and start to investigate it. Here's the good news. Hive mortality has been declining for the last 6 years. We almost dealt with colony collapse disorder because we've figured out the range of problems. And the reason that we've done this is because beekeepers like me, if we don't figure it out, our hives die and we lose money. We don't get honey. Individuals know the best way to solve the problems that are in front of them. Only you know the ways that you can use less energy, use less gas, telecommute, carpool. And it's different for each and every one of you. A simple and transparent price engages the free market so that you can do that, so that we can truly be effective. And here's the great thing. If you're not effective, you pay more. You don't want to pay more. You feel it. You can't get around that price. Politicians can claim victory even when they fail. If you try to claim victory, you still pay the price. That's why it's superior. That's why a simple carbon tax is superior to cap and trade. Thank you so much.
The next speaker is Yoram Bauman, and he's the world's one and only stand-up economist, right? Apart from his unique stand-up comedy, Yoram also founded and helps to lead CarbonWA, which is a non-profit dedicated to pushing for a revenue-neutral carbon tax in Washington State, which I'm sure he'll tell you a bit more about. He's author of a number of different books, including the rather delightful Cartoon Introduction to Climate Change. Bauman received his undergraduate degree in maths at Reed College, but he's also an alum of UW. He got his PhD in economics from the University of Washington, where he also worked as a professor in the College of the Environment. And I believe there's probably some of his students in the audience.
Thank you all for coming out and spending your evening with us tonight. I'm an environmental economist. I'm here with Carbon Washington, and I want to tell you about the revenue neutral carbon tax effort that we are launching this year. So many of you saw the articles in the Seattle Times last week, and there have been lots of questions about how the work that we're doing and the campaign that we're working on relates to the governor's bill and the governor's push. And so I want to address that at the very start and put out this idea that we see ourselves sort of as being the relief pitcher. Okay? In other words, there's a starting pitcher, and then there's a relief pitcher. So we're not opposing the governor's policy. We're not in competition with the governor's policy. What it is that our ballot measure is the relief pitcher for the governor's legislative route. That's how we see ourselves. Okay? And we all know the legislative route is very challenging. And so we think that we wish the governor the best of luck in that. But we're preparing a ballot measure campaign to step in. And so the strategy that we have is that we're going to file an initiative to the legislature. That's coming in March, so in 2 months. And we're going to collect 315,000 signatures by the end of the year. That's going to put it before the January 2016 legislature. It's going to put our proposal before the January 2016 legislature. They either have to pass it, and we think there's actually a chance that they will pass it, or they're going to put it on the November 2016 ballot. We've raised about $100,000 in the last month. We've hired co-directors for our campaign, both of whom are here tonight, Duncan Clausen and Kyle Murphy. So we have a terrific amount of momentum going. And as someone who's been involved in this effort for many years, it's very exciting to see that building. So what is our proposal? Here it is in a nutshell. It's very similar to the British Columbia carbon tax that's been working successfully in British Columbia since 2008. We have a carbon tax on fossil fuels. That's going to generate a pile of revenue, and then we use the revenue to reduce existing taxes. So it's 100% revenue neutral. Most of the revenue is going to go to cut the state sales tax by a full percentage point. So in very broad strokes, to a first approximation, what the policy does is folks are going to pay a few $100s more a year for fossil fuels and a few $100s less a year for everything else. We also have portions of the policy. We're going to fund the working families rebate, which is an earned income offset, earned income tax credit type policy that benefits low-income households in the state. And we're going to effectively eliminate the B&O tax, the business tax for manufacturers in the state. That's going to address impacts on energy-intensive manufacturers, especially trade-exposed manufacturers. And the carbon tax rate is going to slowly go up over time to maintain revenue neutrality over time. So that's our policy in a nutshell. If you're interested in seeing how this is going to affect your particular household, I want to promote a project that we worked on with some folks in the computer science department here at the university. There's the website, carbon.cs.washington.edu. You can actually go to the website and enter some information about how much you earn. It'll estimate your sales tax savings, and then you say how much gas you use and how much do you fly and what's your zip code, and it figures out who your electricity provider is. And it'll actually tell you at the end, it'll give you a number that says, look, this is how much you win or this is how much you lose from the policy. Super terrific, especially if you're into really wonky things. It's a great tool. I love the calculator, and I'm very grateful to the folks in the computer science department who worked on that. I want to emphasize that this is a bipartisan effort. So we have letters of support on our website, carbonwa.org. From economists around the state, we have letters of support, including a number of economists here at the University of Washington. We're building support from across the political spectrum. A couple of examples, the Seattle Times in their editorial about the governor's policies that a revenue neutral approach would be both less financially risky and more politically viable. We have an endorsement from the Seattle Business Magazine. You can get a link to that on our website as well. And I want to emphasize something that's come up recently, which is the idea that carbon taxes are better than you think. Okay, so if we go back to this, I want to go back to a little bit of a high school mentality, right? There's a high school mentality that somehow says that carbon taxes might win sort of the most studious award, okay, but that they're never going to win most popular. It's got the T word in it. Okay.
And there's even an argument that says that they're not even most likely to succeed, because there's this idea lately that I've seen that you need a carbon tax of $50 or $100 per ton of CO2 in order to really affect behavior. And our carbon tax starts at $15 and then $25 and then goes up slowly after that. Carbon taxes are better than you think. I want to give you one example of this. This is a model from the Energy Information Administration showing business as usual. Here's in blue, and this is for national electricity. Here's the effect of a $25 per ton of CO2 carbon tax, going up at 5% per year. A tremendous, tremendous impact from $25 per ton of CO2. Transportation, you might think, is a little bit of a harder nut to crack. That's true, but I have good news here too. This is the same EIA model. This is showing business as usual is in blue, and then the effect of a $25 per ton of CO2 carbon tax is in purple. Almost no effect. If you look at something locally, you get a similar result. So this is what the CTAM model. This is actual. The blue here is what actually happened in Canada over the last few years, and the purple is using the CTAM model to project what would happen what would have happened in Canada or in British Columbia if you had a $25 per ton of CO2 carbon tax. Now, British Columbia actually had a carbon tax. They implemented it in 2008. It's now $30 per ton of CO2, and we can actually see what happened in British Columbia and compare it to Canada as a whole. And here's what actually happened in British Columbia. Carbon emissions are down much more than the model projected. And I'm happy to talk about why during Q&A. There's some really neat economics papers about this. So for those of you who are here from the Evans School, the good news is the CTAM model was actually developed by a student at the Evans School a couple years ago as his Evans project, Kevin Mori. So the good news is that there's this model that was done by a student here at the Evans School, and this model it's kind of the primary model that folks use to look at the impacts of carbon policies in Washington State. It's been adopted to other states. So that's the good news, is that the work you do here can really make a difference. The bad news is that the model makes some mistakes. So get it right. And I know there are folks who are working on improving it. Okay, but what about polling? What about the political viability? So here's a poll that came out just in the last couple of weeks. They basically tested on our policy. And what they showed was, well, let me give you some numbers. Even among the GOP, right? Even among Republicans, we got almost 40%. That's not bad. Okay. Overall, we got close to 54%. That number's not great, but it's not terrible. Right? We have a chance. And I want to emphasize that among the 18 to 34-year-olds, we got almost 77% support. So this is ultimately going to end up on the November 2016 ballot, presidential year, important year that's going to bring out a lot of young voters. So that's part of the strategy for why we're targeting November 2016. So I started with a baseball metaphor about the relief pitcher. I'm going to end with a mixed baseball metaphor. We're going to take a swing at the ball. I'm not saying that this is easy. I'm saying that it's possible. We have a chance, and we should take advantage of that and go for it. Thank you very much.
And our final panelist, Nicole Keenan, is the Policy Director at Puget Sound SAGE. She oversees SAGE's policy and research work and provides policy and data analysis for SAGE's labor standards, wage, and environmental justice campaigns. She is the current board president of the Asian Community Leadership Foundation. Nicole holds a bachelor's degree in public policy from the College of William & Mary and a master's in social work with a focus on policy and community-centered practice from the University of Washington.
So Puget Sound SAGE is a regional organization, and we're primarily focused on equity. We're interested in making sure that everyone has a good job, an affordable place to live, a clean and healthy environment, and access to the transit they need to get around. And so when I talk about equity, I want to make sure that we all are sharing a similar framework so that we can get more into and understand what I'm talking about. So can anyone here tell me the difference between the picture on the left and the picture on the right? The difference between equality and equity? Up there in the back.
On the left, people are all given the same support, even though it means some people without the support they need. But on the right, everyone's given as much support as they need. They're all level playing fields.
I couldn't have said that better myself. Thank you. So I want to talk about the climate gap and how people of color and people with lower incomes are impacted first and worst by climate change. So as a Filipina American, this is something that's very personal to me. This is the aftermath of Typhoon Haiyan. So just a moment of pause on that one. Let's talk about how we could be impacted here in Seattle. So according to the University of Washington, sea levels will rise by 5 to 50 inches over the next 100 years. We can expect more heat waves. We can expect to pay more for basic necessities. And what I mean by that is as resources become more scarce, the basic things that people of color and people with lower incomes already spend so much on, we'll have to pay even more for that down the road. For folks that are opposed to climate action at all, they'll cite increased gas prices or increased prices in certain ways. But we're going to pay more for our basic necessities no matter what. And so we better address climate change now so that we don't have to pay more down the road. And this is one that's really important in Puget Sound Sage, is we'll breathe dirtier air. So these are pictures from Seattle. This is the Duwamish, the Port of Seattle. And this is a young girl that's actually the daughter of one of our constituents who breathes dirty air on a regular basis. So I also want to acknowledge that this is the result of unregulated free markets. So this is actually a chart of how we see and experience different exposures to diesel exhaust within our region. And this is just within the city of Seattle. So you can see that Georgetown and South Park have the highest, this is actually for nitropyrene, sorry, highest exposure to nitropyrene compared to Queen Anne, Beacon Hill. Downtown and South Park are among the worst. So we actually measured this in partnership with the University of Washington Department of Public Health, put home monitors on various elementary schools, parking lots, homes, and found that one of the worst sites in our region for breathing dirty air is the elementary school in South Park. So why carbon pricing matters, and why it matters for equity. So reinvestment in communities that are the most impacted is vital for a carbon pricing scheme that addresses equity, because we're often hit first and worst. One of the reasons why the governor's bill addresses equity is that it actually maps which areas have the worst exposure to carbon pollution. It includes environmental hotspot mapping as part of the bill, so we know who's hit first and worst, and we can make investments in those communities. The other thing that's really great about the program, it has an environmental justice oversight board. So people who live and are from those communities can actually monitor this policy and see if it's working for them. Oh, apparently there's one of these too. That's great. So I want to talk a little bit about what California did so we can take some lessons learned and see how the governor actually applied those to his current bill. So in 2006, California passed AB 32, which was their cap and trade program. And it actually incorporates the ability to implement a cap and trade. It doesn't say they have to do a cap and trade, but that's what they chose to do. And then, about 5 years later, California passed SB 535, which actually reinvests the revenues from cap and trade directly into environmental justice communities, representing in our nation the largest investment in EJ communities across the country. So 25% of the revenues from cap and trade benefit disadvantaged communities, 10% benefit disadvantaged communities directly in the communities themselves. It goes to cleaning up air pollution, improving public health, supporting mobility choices, supporting job creation and economic growth in the clean energy economy, and many more. So this is actually a fact sheet directly from California, looking at all the different ways that they not only reduced carbon emissions, but also reinvested that money to further reduce carbon emissions. So they invested in renewable energy, transit-oriented development, transit options, clean trucks. And this is their accountability system. So they actually have, it's called Quad Program Committee Strategy. So people from the community actually oversee the policy itself, divided into various committees based on their expertise in energy, transportation, freight, affordable housing, and urban forestry. So again, I just wanted to end on this slide of equality and equity. The difference really matters in terms of how long people live, the kinds of quality of lives that we have. And there's several factors of PJ hotspot mapping and the oversight board that really make sure that this policy addresses equity, not just equality across the board. Thank you.
So I'd like to invite all 4 of our panelists up to the front table. And each will have 2 minutes to respond to each other, and then we'll open it up to the audience for Q&A. And I believe those microphones are both working right there, but why don't you just check that?
In Maryland, where they've been trying to put a carbon price in for several years with activists working very hard, now there's a Republican governor, that plan is dead for now. Here, we have a governor that's been a leader on climate for a long time, who's articulate, and he's trying to do something that will be a bit that the whole world can look at for this year. So my question to you would be why are you not putting your stuff in a drawer this year? It seems that you're muddying the waters. From my perspective, where I try to educate citizens about climate change, there's about 5,000 people in the state that would actually want to talk for 2 hours about this, and almost nobody, and the polling says that a lot of people, over 50%, are scared about climate change, but very few of those people are willing to take this walk up the hill to start to understand the technology and policy solution set. And it's a real hard sell, and you need simple stories from the beginning. And if coming out of the gate, we are saying, well, the governor, who some people support, is doing this thing, but actually there's all these people who also think there has to be a carbon price, and they're doing something completely different. How do you then begin to go to the general public? So I thought this meeting would be how we all, I mean, if the governor had come out for a carbon tax, I'd be spending my days reading about carbon tax and total support. But he didn't, and how can you blow this thing up? I'm sorry to be direct.
I'm not sure I'm blowing it up. I don't see any support for the governor's plan. And fundamentally, I don't believe it'll work. So would you say the same thing? So I've done a lot of work on green schools, like green buildings. Would you also say, why are you complaining about green buildings? At least we're trying to do something green. Stop saying that they don't work. If we're going to we got to get the policy right. And like I said, we saw what happened when we had a big price spike in energy in 2001. The aluminum companies left. Washington's emissions went down. The world's emissions didn't.
I'm sorry. I mean, there's
fundamentally
arguments for the points you two make about a carbon price. There are equally strong arguments for what led the California Energy Commission to spend 10 years to decide to do.
Well, make those arguments. That's fine, but the argument can't be, you need to be quiet. Your argument is, Todd, you're causing problems. Shut up.
Yes. Yes.
That was much shorter than the original question, too.
That's not a democracy. Right? I mean, that's not a reality-based approach. We live in a democracy, right? Maryland elected a Republican governor. So how do you deal with that? Do you get mad and tell everybody shut up?
Okay, Yoram.
No, you have to deal with it.
Yoram.
I have a very quick response, which is that I don't think I have a whole lot to add to the relief pitcher analogy that I gave earlier. If you like the governor's policy and you want to put your shoulder behind it, then go do it. We're working on the carbon Washington effort to put something, an initiative to the legislature starting in March. And if you like what we're doing, then come join us.
So we'll go here, and then on the side.
Yeah, welcome to democracy. I think this is a great discussion, and I think it's really important for people to get engaged, whatever the outcome. We know the process is messy. It was messy for every fundamental reform that's ever been developed in this country politically over the last 250 years, including how we got our independence. So we're now facing, I think, a real turning point and a flex point in our future, collective future. And this is a big issue, and it needs to be thought about, it needs to be debated, and it needs to be addressed. I happen to believe that what the governor is doing is both noble and well-intended, but has some limitations, both in its approach to dealing with what price we actually put on carbon that represents the true cost to society and to the planet of all the damage we've been doing by allowing people to waste energy for hundreds of years. That cost is building, it's a cumulative cost that we're going to be paying for years and years to come. So there is more to this than simply whether we tax carbon or we put permits, sell permits, and then hide it in the form of some future price increase to the extent of those people that buy the permits, pass them on to their customers. We need to put a price on carbon because we are all users of carbon. We are producers of carbon, and it's a pollutant. And therefore, if we don't put a cost on it, we are allowing people who put it out for free to create more damage than they're really willing to pay for. The second point I'd make is our whole gap accounting system assumes that people pay the right cost and get genuine revenues to cover those costs when they produce goods and services and sell them in the open market. When you don't have the right cost, you're giving people the incentive to either overinvest or underinvest in alternatives. And that's a huge, huge obstacle to getting to clean energy solutions in our free market economy. So I think we need more than just a price on carbon to reduce the consumption. We need to send the right price signals and make it a more even playing field for those of us who want alternatives to dirty fossil fuels.
Thank you. So I think we'll take two more, and then I'll turn to our student organizers and see how long we'd like to go. But I had called on one person here and one on the side, so why don't we go ahead?
I want to make 2 points, and I hope I'm briefer than the last question.
Thank you.
The first point is I think I can agree with almost everything all the panelists have said, and a philosophy that I heard from a senator in our local state Congress. If we don't get the carbon plan of the governor's passed, we need to have a Carbon Washington kind of initiative for a tax to hold over the legislature's head to make them seriously think about one or the other, and that's where we need to be. So either one is going to be good. Hopefully, if we can get the legislature behind one, we'll be in good shape. Second point, I just want to elaborate on something Todd Myers said about green buildings. You probably left a misconception, and I'm a certified lead specialist, and I just want you to...
I knew I opened a can of worms, I'm sorry.
And I know why you said it, and it's a very good point. We're not doing the right approach to green buildings, but if we did the right approach to green buildings, it would save a lot of energy and help solve the climate problem.
Thank you. Who was it? I think it was you, yeah.
So I appreciate Nicole for bringing social justice into this conversation. I work in housing, and to me, climate change at the end of the day is ultimately a social justice issue. And there have been some comments about revenue neutral versus revenue positive. One thing that I can say based on what I'm hearing as the legislature is starting is that if we're looking at a revenue neutral policy, the revenues that would be generated from cap and trade are revenues that will help raise the quality of life and the economic potential of low-income people. So I guess my question is, is there a way to have, if the carbon tax is better than cap and trade, and I don't know enough about either to really make that assessment, could there be a revenue positive carbon tax? Because in this state, if we don't have revenues generated, I guarantee you, low-income people will suffer.
Could there be a revenue positive carbon tax? The answer is yes.
So can I quickly just do one thing? I
Yes,
know I'm not
please.
the moderator, but I really want to call on the young woman in the back.
I am going to call actually on 2 people in the back.
Okay,
Yes.
good.
Yeah. Are we set with this point, though? The answer was yes. Okay, excellent.
And yes, but
I just feel like the issue needs to be addressed today. I've heard it today. I just wonder how we can think we can trust the free market when they're the ones who created the problem. Capitalism created the problem. So how can we address capitalism if we don't address how can we address climate change if we don't address capitalism's insatiable need to consume?
I think that your
Casey,
comment.
take it.
Yeah, I think you just. I don't think you need a response. I think it's just a yes. Yes, I agree.
Can I hear what Todd Meyer?
Yeah. I had a sense it was pointed at me. So I was going to say, I asked Casey, but you also work for government. So I was going to say that the irony is that I thought I was the only person who had actually worked in government at this panel, because I worked at the Department of Natural Resources. So I don't have you worked in government? Okay. So I actually worked in government. So the notion that I somehow am anti-government when I actually worked there, I mean, I've seen it. I know what its strengths are. I know what its limitations are. Okay? So when I tell you that putting your faith in politicians is not a good way to go, it's because I lived it. Okay? So that's the problem. The issue that hang on. The issue that we're dealing with here is how do you make sure that people pay for the impact they cause? Okay? And the best way to do that is to put a price on all impacts, because only you know how to avoid the impact you're causing. Okay? That's the only person who knows how to avoid the impact you cause, by putting a price on it. Okay? Government does good one-size-fits-all solutions, and if you think that a one-size-fits-all solution will work, you haven't been paying attention. The free market is the best approach to do more with less. That's what it's about. And there is no more fundamental environmental principle than doing more with less. So here's the choice. You can have Seattle's air quality in a capitalist society, or New York's air quality in a capitalist society, or you can have Beijing's in a government-run society. Or you can have Moscow's.
Okay, Nicole, comment.
That's the fundamental difference.
Nicole and then
where
Casey.
you see the worst environmental damage in the world is where you see government-run systems. You.
Thank you.
Okay,
Nicole and then Casey.
so I'll just make this quick because people want to go home. Todd, I am so impressed with your ability to stick to your talking points. I'm just like, oh, I want to be like you in that way. But I'm not. So I want to thank you for the bravery of your question. And it's a tough question to answer, because if I knew the answer, I'd go be doing that exact thing right now. But I will say that there is immense power in local solutions to big problems. And the one place that Todd and I might agree is that communities know what's best for them. And I think that if we as communities come together and inform our governments of what we need, we have a hell of a lot better chance than if we go it alone. Yeah. Thank you.
Casey and then Yoram.
It's kind of amazing that we've gone this long without talking about the concentrated economic and political power of the fossil fuel industry. It's not as though government and politicians, and by the way, those are two separate things, are some kind of sort of neutral force that isn't doing anything. We have a system right now that is set up to feed and reinforce the concentrated economic power of the fossil fuel industry. And I know the oil lobbyists, and they're not terrible people, and there's this sort of well, business is business, and we keep on doing it, and Shell can use the port for its Arctic drilling operations. I got to tell you, the only way to win on climate, just mathematically and scientifically, is with a complete clean energy revolution over the course of our lifetimes. We have to phase out fossil fuel use. The fossil fuel industry is going to fight that tooth and nail. I mean, it's asking them to do otherwise would be like asking bees to go out of the honey business. It's what they do. And in order to wage and win that revolution, I think there is a big role for individual creativity. I think there is a big role for individual action. But I have to say, until we get our political power back and until we break the stranglehold of fossil fuels on our democracy, we will not have the collective power to win this revolution. We can't do it individually.
So I think that's great. I don't have a problem with that.
Excuse me.
This question, I mean, is directed to me. But I mean, I think
You
that's great.
answered it, and now it's Yoram's turn to have a word. Yeah, Yoram, and then we're done. You answered it, Todd. Thank you so much.
If you think that clean air quality in China is because of the oil industry, you're not paying attention.
Yes, we heard your answer. Thank you, and Yoram is up, and then we're going to thank everyone. It was a very rich question. It's drawing a lot of interest, so thank you to the questioners.
I want to get back to being an economist. So the question that economists deal with is, when do free markets work? Yeah. And the answer is sometimes. Okay? So I would argue as an economist that there are many, many circumstances when free markets do a pretty good job of things. And then I would argue that there are some cases, and climate change is one of them, where free markets don't work very well, and that's why we're here talking about carbon pricing and other kinds of approaches to dealing with market failure. So I guess what I would encourage you to do is don't throw the capitalist baby out with the dirty climate change bathwater. I once taught a class with a Marxist economist. We were co-teachers on the class, and he poo-pooed what I was talking about with carbon taxes by saying that all I wanted to do was put carbon tax frosting on the capitalist cake. And that's actually pretty much what I want to do. And I think that would be okay. The last thing I want to leave you with is actually to go back to one of Casey's earliest slides, which was talking about business as usual and kind of the international perspective. The international perspective, and I think this is something incredibly important to think about when you're thinking about growth and things like this. I have my own theory of the world. I'm very proud of it. I call it the 5 Chinas theory of the world. 5 Chinas theory of the world says you take world population, which is about 7 billion people, you divide by 5, you get 1.4 billion, which is approximately the population of China. India has about as many people as China. Everybody else in developing Asia, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Philippines, Pakistan, Vietnam, add them up, about the same population as China. The 4th China is the rich world. North America, Europe, Japan, South Korea, a couple other random countries. Okay? The 5th China is everybody else, which is principally Africa and South America. If you look at CO2 emissions from those 5 Chinas at the beginning of this century, the rich world was responsible for about half of world CO2 emissions. Okay? There are going to be 2 big stories of this century, in my view. One of them is going to be about growth and development in places in the world that are currently very poor, getting access to electricity, to transportation, to education, to healthcare, to things that we take for granted. In many ways, I think that's a very positive story. I think the other big story of this century is going to be dealing with the environmental impacts of having 7 billion people on this planet growing to 10 or 11 billion people who are all trying to lead the lifestyles that we lead here. So when you talk about growth and capitalism, the perspective to have is not the perspective of from where we sit. It's the perspective of the folks in China and India. They're going to be driving, perhaps literally, what happens over the course of this century. So that's the perspective that I would encourage you to think about with regards to your question.
Thank you, Yoram, Nicole, Todd, and Casey.